Hello and welcome to this lesson on how to run audio over Ethernet. And I'm going to go over 4 use case scenarios and 4 different ways of running audio over Ethernet and the setup and the cost of each of these systems. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll 1, have a better understanding of how to run audio over Ethernet, and then 2, what the best system is for your specific needs and your budget. All right, before we jump in, I do want to say I have a free resource for you. This is my free soundproofing workshop. If you're on the journey of designing your own home recording studio, this is an invaluable resource. You can watch it right away at soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. That is soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. All right, let's jump into this lesson on audio over Ethernet, or as it's known professionally, AoIP, or audio over IP, Internet Protocol. All right, so I'm going to be going over 4 popular systems for running audio over Ethernet. The first one will be Dante. The second one will be AVB, or audio visual bridging. The third one is going to be SoundGrid by Waves. And lastly, the 4th system I'm going to be talking about is Q-SYS by the company Q-SYS that I have always known as making speakers, but they also make high-end distribution networking systems. Also, before I jump in to each specific topic, I want to go over a quick introduction of what even is audio over Ethernet. For those of you who are maybe like myself, we're very used to the old school method of buying an interface, plugging some XLR cords into it, running either like a USB-C or a Thunderbolt cable to our computer, and that's the end of that's it. It's simple. And honestly, that system is great for a reason. It is fairly simple. But as we get into more complex routing situations, especially routing to multiple studio rooms through a wall, the idea of routing either a single or just a few Ethernet cables to your entire studio becomes very appealing. And this is where audio over Ethernet comes in. So a Cat5, or preferably actually a Cat6 shielded Ethernet cable, is the way to run audio over Ethernet. So you may not have realized this, but those cables can actually transmit not only audio, but also video and obviously the internet too. So it's an incredibly useful cable for us home studio designers, especially if we're even interested in adding video to our setup as well. This system also gives you the ability to have real-time processing, meaning very minimal low latency latency when you're doing live recordings or live shows. Scalability, so you can build out your studio over time and easily add in more inputs and outputs. And the flexibility of creating complex systems within a single system. So it's hard to set up the system at first, but once you have it set up, you can add in lots of complexity, such as potentially wiring in multiple computers, different lighting setups, and video setups. So if you're trying to, instead of having a live room, for example, you want to have a video where you can easily see people back and forth, or do live streaming or live recording in your studio. These are all reasons why audio over Ethernet is probably a good choice. All right, let's go over the systems breakdown first. So let's start with Dante. Dante is great for home studios because it does have the ability to have scalability, flexibility, low latency, and compatibility. Now that was a lot of abilities or illities. So what I want to go over really with Dante is the fact that it's become one of the premier systems for integrating audio over Ethernet. Now let's first go over the hardware that you would need to set up your Dante setup. First, you could buy the Focusrite RedNet X2P interface. Now this interface is not super cheap. It comes in at $1,300. As another option, you could also check out the Yamaha TO 1608. Now this interface is actually cheaper, and it comes in at $1,500 roughly, and also it has a lot more inputs and outputs, which would be more useful for a larger studio. Now with most of these setups, you're going to want to have some sort of Ethernet switch, and the reason for this is that having an Ethernet cable go directly from the interface into a wall and throughout your studio could lead to potential connectivity issues. So it's better practice to have a switch, which also would allow you to plug in multiple Ethernet connections from other things like video or lighting or other things you need to communicate within your system for future. So in general, I highly recommend getting a switch of some kind, and this is an Ethernet switchboard. And the one I'm going to recommend for this Dante setup would be the Netgear ProSafe GS724T, and it comes in at around $300. Now next, this is something that I found a little confusing, but there is an optional audio card, PCLE card, that can enhance the latency, so reducing the latency and enhance the audio signal. But this is optional because you don't necessarily need it to run your Dante system. But if you do go that route, you can check out the AudioNet Dante PCLE-R card, which comes in at about $750. Now for the software needed to set up your Dante system, you're really only going to need two things. You're going to need the Dante Virtual Soundcard, which should run you around $50 for one machine, and then the price goes up for multiple machines, meaning computers. And then you'll need the Dante Controller, which is free, and you can download it right from the website. Thank goodness, right? Because that was pretty expensive. So let's go into the cost breakdown for a Dante setup. On the low end, you could probably spend around $1,680. On the high end, to get just a basic home studio setup, you might end up spending upwards of $3,000 or more. The Dante setup is honestly best for small to large studios who do have the budget to invest in the Dante hardware, which is where the majority of the cost is. And you need the ability to have real-time recording and monitoring with the ability to expand over time. And Dante has become a trusted and one of the #1 options out there. So you are, I think, paying a little bit of a premium for their hardware and their software. So the next option we have is AVB, or Audio Video Bridging Network. The Audio Video Bridging Network would be a great choice for a more budget-conscious studio, someone who wants perfect sync between audio and video, and a much simpler setup overall than some of the other options on my list. So for the hardware needed, you're going to need an interface, just like we did for the Dante. And there's two that I recommend. One is the MOTU AVB ES, and this will come in at around $995. And then there's also the PreSonus option, which I actually think looks really great. And this would be the PreSonus StudioLive 32R, which would be about $1,700, but you're paying a premium but getting a much larger amount of ins and outs, up to 32 channels here. Next, you will need an AVB compliant switch. For this, I recommend the Extreme Networks X440 G2, which comes in around $750. Now, just like a lot of these setups, you're going to need some sort of software to run and connect all the hardware together. For this, I recommend just getting the PreSonus UC Surface, which is free for StudioLive, or the MOTU AVB Control. Also happens to be free. So let's look at the cost of a setup using AVB as your main Ethernet system. On the low end, you're looking at around $1,745. And then on the higher end, you would probably be looking at something in the $2,450 range for a basic setup. So certainly cheaper than Dante. Again, this is great for small to medium-sized home recording studios that are more on the budget-conscious side. And I would also say it's got a benefit because you can add in the video side more easily as well. In doing all this research, which it was a lot of research, and there's a lot to learn about this whole setup, but if I were to build a studio or for my clients, I think I'm going to lean towards the AVB setup because I think it's a little cheaper and easier, and in the long run, I think it'll accomplish what a lot of home studios need. However, I don't want to stop there because there are still two other really great systems out there that might be perfect for you. Next, I want to talk about the SoundGrid system by Waves. Now, we all might know the Waves plugins. A lot of us have used them over the years for mixing and mastering, but we can also integrate an audio over Ethernet system using Waves technology. The Waves SoundGrid system is also great for real-time monitoring and recording and playback. It supports an extremely high channel count, so that is another benefit if you need to run, upwards of like 250 channels at a time. and it seamlessly integrates into the Waves ecosystem. So if you're a huge fan of the Waves plugins, you can then use those Waves plugins in line with your live audio or your studio audio, meaning that you can actually, like the Apollo and the universal audio interfaces, put compressors and EQs and whatever plugin you want going into your computer before it's actually recorded on your DAW. So this is similar to having outboard gear in a home recording studio. So for the Waves SoundGrid system, you're going to start with some hardware, and the first thing you're going to need is a Waves compatible interface. And that can come in around $1,050 just for a 2-input interface. So pretty expensive, and then the price just goes up with that. Another option that might be a better fit for a lot of you out there with your own interface already is that you can purchase the DigiGrid MGB, which would allow you to then use an optical cable to then send information from your existing interface into the Waves SoundGrid system. This is not cheap though, and it comes in at $3,000. However, when you compare the existing interfaces to this little unit that converts any interface, it actually seems like an attractive option. Now I'm going to put this in as an optional side, but I think if you really like the idea of recording or using a live sys setup with the Waves plugins, you would want to incorporate this into your setup, which is the Waves SoundGrid Proton, which is the interface that allows you to run all the plugins live in real time. And that's not a cheap interface either. That'll come in at $849. Lastly, like the other systems, we're going to need some sort of network switch. And this, again, is going to help you with the cleanliness of your Ethernet signal. And for that setup, I would recommend the Netgear ProSafe GS716T, and that comes in at $230. Now let's talk about some of the software needed for the Waves SoundGrid system. Basically, you're going to need their free software, which is the SoundGrid Studio software that you can download from their website. And then, of course, you can add in the Waves plugins if you don't already own them, and you'll buy those separately, either bundled or individually over time, which could range from anywhere from like $200 to $600, or even up to thousands of dollars if you buy them all at once. So the estimated price for a Waves SoundGrid setup is going to be on the low end, probably around $1,280, and then more upwards towards $4,079 on the higher end. But as you can see, the more channel counts you need and the larger your audio interface, that's where you're going to end up spending on that higher end versus the lower end, which is just 2 channels of in and out. All right, let's talk about the last option. And this is probably the most complex setup that you can do, although it is also the most robust. And this is the Q-SYS Q-SYS system. And Q-SYS is a really respectable company. I owned one of their speakers for a while. I really loved it. It was really well made, sounded great. So definitely a great option if you want to go this route. However, I do think it's going to be expensive and, like I said, a bit more complicated than our traditional studio setups. So overall, why is this setup a great home studio option? Well, it's really going to be good for those who want to do both audio and video and potentially even lighting. You could control like a full broadcast studio with this setup, and that's actually what it's used for. So say you have lights on the ceiling hanging from a grid, and you have multiple cameras in your room, plus a full audio recording setup. You could literally control everything over Ethernet using this setup. So if that's something you're interested in and you're super techie and you have a slightly larger budget, then this could definitely be for you. It also runs on the typical internet or audio over internet protocol AES67, which you can do some research on. I'm not going to go into it in depth here, but that's basically the AoIP or audio over internet protocol that has been set to create a standard so that all these different networks like Dante or the Q-SYS can all communicate with each other, leading to greater compatibility. So let's start with the hardware that you're going to need. You're going to need some sort of like brain for the operation of the Q-SYS system. And what I recommend right now is getting the Q-SYS Core 110F, which will probably run you about $2,300. I did some research and I found out that I think due to supply chain issues, this is probably more on the used market than the new market. Although Q-SYS does offer different audio interfaces, or like the brains of this operation besides this unit, although I think this unit would be good for most mid-level recording studios. Now, I have never really seen these cables before because they're used more in like broadcast situations, but they use what's known as a Phoenix connection. And you can actually get a DB25, which means that a DB25 connection, for those who don't know, can take 8 XLR channels and convert them into a single connector, which can go on the back of your audio interface. So let's say you have a 16-channel audio interface and you have 2 DB25 connectors. You can actually buy a custom and I'll have the link in the description below here, for a custom Mogami DB25 to 8 Phoenix channels that plug into the back of the Q-SYS interface. All right, that's complex, but this is what you would need in order to convert XLR audio into these specialty units on the back. Now, the main reason for using the Phoenix connectors, from what I understand, is just that it takes up way less space and it makes for a very clean connection point on the back of the box. Those cables would probably run you about $100 each, so I would say like $200 if you're doing a typical 16-channel setup, and obviously if you're doing more, you just add an extra 100 for each cable you're going to need. But remember again that the Q-SYS can do many different outputs and inputs, so you can do multiple DB25 cables into the back of it, which is one of the benefits of using this setup. Now for the software, you're going to use the proprietary Q-SYS software, which will come with the interface itself, I believe, or you can download it from their website. Now, the big benefits of using this setup, like I said before, but I'll recap here, is that it's going to mainly be for advanced home recording studio setups and content creators who want a really professional, clean system. So in conclusion, what setup and what system is best for you? I would say the best all-around choice, if budget is not really an issue, is going to be the Dante network. It's certainly flexible and future-proof, and it will be helpful for growing your studio over time. The best budget option is going to be the AVB setup, and like I said, honestly, because I work with home studio recording studios where budget is always an issue, and maybe spending another $5,000 to $10,000 on a Dante network is not something you want to do, then choosing something like the PreSonus setup within an AVB system is going to be your best option. So that's my budget-friendly option for those of you out there. If you're really into real-time processing, I think the best for real-time processing option is going to be Wave SoundGrid. If you like the Waves company, you like their plugins, then the Wave SoundGrid is a great option. One of the reasons I don't like it is, one, I've used Wave SoundGrid and I found it super complex to work with. And then two, they don't offer any sort of video capability mixed in, whereas Dante and the Q-SYS and the AVB version all are more robust networks that can integrate with different types of technologies. And I think that's really important for home studios where we're trying to communicate with video, do live streaming, record. We're in a different age than just recording audio in our recording studios. And last, the best setup for advanced needs, if you want literally a professional broadcast studio in your home recording studio, is to use the Q-SYS setup by Q-SYS. I still think it's a great option, and maybe one I would look into if my client has a big budget and wants to do something really cool with lighting, video, and audio all integrated into one switchboard. So those are the 4 systems that I've done a lot of research into. There's certainly always more you can do, so hopefully this video will be a jumping off point for you if you're going down this research of which audio over Ethernet system is best for your home recording studio. In the end, I do think that the future of audio is moving in this direction. There's no doubt that running Ethernet cables through your walls versus full-on snakes of XLR cables is much easier and cost-effective. So in the long run, it is probably something we're going to see a lot more of in the future of home studio design. All right, my name is Wilson Harwood. Thanks so much for watching. I'm an acoustician and studio designer based in Nashville, Tennessee, and I will see you all later. Again, if you're doing this on your own, you're DIYing your studio, definitely check out my free soundproofing workshop at soundproofyourstudio.com/workshop. And if you watched all this and are like, holy cow, that's so complex and I have no interest in doing this myself, then reach out to me for a Soundproof clarity call on my website at soundproofyourstudio.com, and I'd be happy to see if we're a good fit for a client-design relationship. All right, I'll see you all later, and thanks so much for watching. I bring new videos with acoustics and soundproofing and now studio design all incorporated every week for you. And I'll see you all next week. Bye.